Welcome to this panel on the chemical weapons regime. For those that do not know me, I'm Maria Garzón Maceda. I work at UNIDIR, the UN Institute for Disarmament Research in Geneva. I'm very happy to be here, so thank you for the organizers on inviting me. It's the first time I come to this conference, so I'm really excited. This panel will try to focus on what's next for the regime and open a little bit the scope from what is disarmament to the chemical weapons regime more in general. We will discuss this in two instances. So we will have a research group, and she's also part of the scientific advisory board at the OPCW. And last but not least, we have Dr. Alexander Gionis. He's a research fellow in chemical and biological security at the Science Policy Research Unit of the Institute of Development Studies at the University of Sussex Business School. Quite a long title. Alex is a co-author of a report, a UNIDIR report, together with Alexander Kelle, that was called Preparing for Success at the Review Conference, part of the UNIDIR work that was funded by the UK, trying to support states parties and other stakeholders in their preparations for the review conference. So I think you're uniquely placed to help us set the stage and kick us off with the first kind of questions about the current challenges, the current situation. So if you could please walk us through what happened at the review conference, what were the expectations, the results, what's going on now. Alex, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much. Maria, thank you very much to the organizers as well. It's great to be here. And if you don't mind, I'm just going to read from my notes because I've only got 5 minutes, and as an Irishman, I can speak quite a lot. So I'm going to try and keep it tight. I want to give a quick review of RC5, but I think more generally this discussion and this event is really nice because I think more than ever we need interdisciplinarity in this disarmament and non-proliferation work that we're doing. Encouraging work between regimes, as we're seeing over these 2 days, but also from different perspectives. And I think certainly from the CWC's perspective, so the Chemical Weapons Convention, this is more needed really than ever, given not just the geopolitical situation, but also the requirement for the OPCW to evolve its implementation beyond destruction, now that destruction is sort of in decline, if not over. So in talking about the review conference itself, I suppose the headline for many people was that there was no consensus outcome document. All that was issued after the week of the conference was the chair's procedural report. So this was replicating the outcome of the fourth review conference in 2018. So on the surface, not a good result. I think it's quite easy to get hung up on this, to sort of view the conference, the work of the states parties, and the actual substance of the regime through a sort of binary lens where we're focusing on the material output document. And that is to say that all of our hopes and dreams really for the review conference are sort of tied up in this idea that we need to have a consensus outcome report. Indeed, I think actually there was hope for something more concrete than this chairperson's report that came out. But as I'm sure we're all aware, the geopolitical situation, the relationships within other multilateral fora, and really the reticence to move towards voting for any outcome document really contrived to give us this outcome. And of course, it's well known that there was a small group of states parties who continued to defend Syria, and the sort of Syrian portfolio is a complex set of issues. And there remained outstanding, and there still remains obviously outstanding issues about Russia as well regarding the poisoning of Skripal, Navalny. So really tough conditions, I think, to try to negotiate language for an outcome document that works for everyone. And I suppose the question is actually, do you water down your beliefs if you're, say, EU member states? Do you think, well, we need to get consensus, and to get consensus we need to water down our language? Or actually do you say, well, we're going to stand firm and, well, we're not going to have a consensus outcome report? So the interpretation, however, that the review conference was somehow a failure or disappointing, I actually disagree with to quite an extent. I mean, I would say don't go for the watered down consensus if it means sacrificing all of the work so far that has been done and that needs to be done. But I also take a more optimistic position, and I think I base this on 2 points, and this will be really the substance of my 5 minutes, which probably only has about 1 minute left. The first is that the review conference itself is actually the culmination of a much longer process, and it's not just the single week that we see. The second point that I'll refer to is that review conferences don't really, certainly in the CWC context, have as much bearing on day-to-day activities of the OPCW, which is charged with the implementation of the CWC. So I'll just look at those two as my key bits. So the review conference is not a single week. It's a long review process, widely seen this time around to be really constructive, productive, a successful review. And this was undertaken through the open-ended working group for the preparation of the 5th review conference, which was chaired by Estonia. And the process started at least a year before the review conference. So I think between June 2022 and April 2023, they had 22 meetings covering destruction, verification, international cooperation, national implementation, organizational governance, engagement, really the whole gamut of issues. And then this working group basically reports back to the conference and, where possible, submits a draft report that could be adopted by the conference. Obviously, this wasn't possible, but there were really quite a number of areas of common ground, sort of pools of common interest that states parties clearly wanted to move forward with. So the process brought people together, they engaged, they considered, and although the sort of consensus language couldn't be found at the end, I think a lot of this work, the vision and the interest, it doesn't just evaporate. So actually discussions at review conference during it, alongside it, and sort of now moving beyond it, have a sort of longer term, in my view, sort of optimism about them because of these pools of common ground that did exist. And the second point I want to make, and really the final one, is that there's actually these main policy-making organs at the OPCW, so that's the Executive Council and the annual Conference of States Parties, and these continue to meet regularly, and they continue to develop positions and put forward decisions. So if we look at the 2 ECs, so Executive Councils, which followed the review conference this year, there's lots of positive action-oriented discussions on the future of verification, scientific needs, gender, geographic representation, tenure, civil society engagement. And at the recent CSP, which was last week, we actually had some really important decisions, and perhaps others on the panel will discuss those, but we had things like the programme and budget, which set forward the next 2 years of funded work for the OPCW. We had the action plan on geographic representation, decision on tenure policy, a decision on addressing the threat of chemical weapon use and future use, and ongoing informal dialogues by states around things like civil society engagement. So really this tells me that a lot of work that went into the review process of RC5 has maintained quite a bit of traction. And most importantly, of course, we've seen that a good programme and budget has also been passed. So in a sense, some decisions may have to be voted on, and there's not much consensus at the review conference or indeed at the conference last week either, because we had to take some votes for decisions. But this does point to, I think, sort of a wider set of common ground, pools of common ground, which sort of flowed through the review conference and continue to exist today. So yeah, my bottom line is, the review conference happened, I think, 6 months ago. There was no consensus outcome. However, the OPCW has sort of moved on. The states continue to work on a variety of issues. And I think the critical thing to see here is that these are long, interconnected developmental processes. They're not just one-off events, and we shouldn't get hung up on looking at RC5 in too much detail or sort of reflecting too much on that event to sort of tell us about the state of the regime. I'll hand back then. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Alex. I do second that last bit that you said. Particularly the fact that we need to focus on finding alternative definitions of success for review conference and diplomatic process in general, not only for the OPCW, but for other regimes as well, and particularly in this challenging geopolitical context, what can be done, right? And thank you for pointing out all those different pools of common interests, as you said. I'm sure we'll touch upon many of those in this panel. But now I would like to move on to our next panelist. So Marcus, I hope it's okay that we stay on a first name basis, if you excuse me. Perhaps you can provide the EU perspective of the review conference and the whole process. The floor is yours.
During March, April and beginning of May, there was an open-ended working group in charge of preparing the review conference and the draft outcome document. It met, if I remember correctly, around 20 times. The EU was fully involved and presented its positions in basically all of the open-ended working group meetings. I recall a very positive and constructive atmosphere from the open-ended working group meetings, which led to that the majority views presented were included in a draft chairperson's document, which was supposed to become then the agreed outcome document. Then moving on to the review conference itself, from EU point of view, as we know, it was a short and intensive 5 days after a long and thorough preparatory process. And in the review conference, progress was achieved across the board on issues that had been pending. Many of them had been pending since the unsuccessful fourth review conference. There was, however, one exception, which was not successful. Again, that was the chemical weapons use by Syria, and how to address it and refer to it in a consensually agreed outcome document. The spoiler was, surprise, surprise, Russia. In the very last statement delivered by the European Union in the conference, actually, we singled out the spoiler for its unwillingness to move and compromise and recognize facts. The Russian unconstructive approach was also clear basically to everyone who were present and who were observing their tactics. And we need to keep in mind that the preparatory phase was an open and constructive and transparent one. And many state parties really made an effort to contribute. However, Russia did not engage basically at all, but when the review conference started, it pushed hard to change the draft text which was on the table. It basically tried to turn the clock back. And restarting from zero at the negotiation table was not really an option and not appreciated. So, and finally, about the overall results of the coming out of the review conference. I agree with Alexander that on the face of it, it wasn't, perhaps you can say that it was not successful because there was no consensually agreed outcome document. But there was movement ahead and willingness across regions to build on and materialize the compromises that were achieved in the work of the open-ended working group on key work strands, and with the understanding that those would be worked on further than in the PMOs, or the policy-making organs meetings, be it the Executive Council or the conferences of state parties, which has been the case. We just come out from the 28th Conference of State Parties, and as I recall, it has been one of the most, let's say, productive meetings I remember during my 5 years in The Hague. There was the chairperson of the REUCOM, the Dutch ambassador, wrote his reflections paper to somehow to actually. Because there was no outcome document to outline what was there, what was achieved, and this basically has worked as an agenda for the further work, which will continue. So actually, it was a quite positive result, and if we go down into actual issues where real and concrete progress was made, I can mention the tenure policy. Now the organization finally has a renewed tenure policy. This is of utmost importance because there has been a brain drain. And actually, I would call it a hemorrhage, because the turnover is simply not tenable. Marcin, you correct me if I'm say it incorrectly, but I think that your boss, the Director General, mentioned that 75% of the professional staff that are in positions at the beginning of was it last year, will have tenured out by the end of this year. Can you imagine what that means for an organization that needs technical skills? I don't want to even think about it. But now there's at least a fix to the means to try to improve the situation. Geographic diversity, which was much discussed in the REV conference, has taken steps forward. There's now an action plan. We'll then have to see how it is implemented, but this is undeniable progress. Gender balance and mainstreaming, that has now, I remember there was a declaration signed by 73 stage parties, so it's gaining traction. Engagement of external stakeholders is going forward. Industry verification methodology to ensure the best uses of OPCW scarce inspection resources is advancing. And finally, which is not actually related to RevCom, but it's an issue we need to reckon with, is that the new laboratory, the Chemtech Center, is now approaching cruising speed. Work to fight against impunity continues on its own weight, despite of having been the stumbling block in RevCom. And finally, perhaps in this context and today, the good questions would be if there were issues that were not addressed or not sufficiently addressed in RevCom. And my view is that, well, there's no such thing as a perfect review, but the review could have benefited from an analysis on export controls, new threats, and digging into a question that why so many stage parties are lagging behind in transferring the obligations from the Chemical Weapons Convention into their national legislation. But I think I might be already speaking too much. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much for helping us take stock of what happened and all the work that has been done, despite the result that might look a little bit challenging. I think that's a good segue for asking what are the main issues for the regime now. You touched upon some of those. And Marcin, from the Strategy and Policy Office perspective, perhaps you can help us walk through some of those.
Thank you very much, Maria. Thank you for the invitation. Good morning, everybody. And before I start talking about the priorities, let me just highlight that this year was very remarkable for the OPCW. There were 3 milestones which were touched upon by my colleague in panel, but let's name them in the sequential order. So first one was inauguration, as Markus mentioned, Center for Chemistry and Technology, the state-of-art laboratory designed for research, training, and capacity building activities. Then the review conference, perfectly described by my colleagues, but I think that nobody expected actually that the final document will be adopted due to very well-known reasons. But as Alex mentioned, this is a process. This is not only the 1 week of deliberation for RevCon, and during this process, the member states agreed to further work on adaptation of the verification regime, as Markus mentioned, enhancement of the international cooperation and assistance programs, on countering further chemical terrorism, and strengthening the organization, which we can discuss further. And the third milestone mentioned by Maria was destruction of all declared chemical weapons. And on 7th of July, United States destroyed the last remaining declared stockpile. In total, more than 72,000 metric tons of chemical weapons have been destroyed under strict supervision of the OPCW. But this is not the end. This is just the end of the beginning, I think. And as the threat of the chemical weapon still exists, and so what are our priorities? First one is preventing reemergence of chemical weapon. Second is destruction of still remaining chemical weapons, and I mean here old and abandoned chemical weapon, but we cannot forget about chemicals dumped in the sea. There are also 4 countries out of the regime, and with at least one possessing, most likely, the chemical stockpile. So it takes me to the third top priority, which is universality of the convention. So in order for the OPCW to reach these priorities must remain agile and effective in these very turbulent times, and there are now ongoing accusations from different parts of the world on the use of chemical weapons, but so far there has been no formal request submitted to the OPCW according to the requirements stipulated in the convention. Challenges, of course, as it is now being debated in the neighboring room, so advancement in technology. This is something which we have on top of our minds. In particular, everybody speaks now on artificial intelligence, but also 3D printings, drones, quantum computing. They will greatly facilitate production, design, of new chemicals, of course, in a more safely and speedy way. The new technologies may be also applied for the verification and inspection regimes. We are at the very beginning of this road, but on the dark side, it might also enable to produce much more toxic chemicals in a more clandestine way. And I think it was Nature Machine Intelligence Journal which revealed that in experiment conducted by the Swiss Federal ABC Protection Agency Institute, it took less than 6 hours for the AI to produce 40,000 very toxic chemicals, very similar to VX, so the most potent nerve agent ever developed. But if we also combine this AI with, for instance, drones, with the means of delivery, then the threat is really very real. And I think it was a few months ago where there was an individual in the UK was sentenced because he was associated with the Islamic State, and in his room, police found drone produced by a 3D printer, capable of carrying chemicals or explosives, as well as recipes for sarin, mustard gas, and resin. So as we see, the threat is there, out there. And but we are, as I said, at the very beginning of assessing how the new technologies will impact the implementation of the convention and its scope. And we need to figure out, because everybody now speaks about this, but we are trying to do it internally at the OPCW. We have a special team who is trying to work out the roadmap, but we will contact also with external experts. Second, and destruction of the, as I said, abandoned and old chemical weapons, sea-dumped chemical weapons. We need to retain the knowledge and expertise of how to destroy a chemical weapon, also because of the universality. And on universality, the Technical Secretariat redouble its efforts to engage with the remaining parties, in particular with South Sudan. South Sudan was present at the inauguration of the Chemtech Center, as well as at the REFCON. And in October, Director General met with the South Sudanese foreign minister, where the joint communique was signed, in which both sides agreed to accelerate efforts to complete the accession process of South Sudan as soon as possible. So I will stop here and looking forward to further questions. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I think you provided a perfect segue for our next speaker, Elisa. As I mentioned, she's part of the Scientific Advisory Board, and the Scientific Advisory Board presented a report to the review conference and the Director General. And if you could pick a few of the risks or challenges that you see coming out of scientific and technical advances that was mentioned, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much. So I'm here talking on behalf of myself. So I'm a scientist. I lead a group in the field of organophosphates that's of interest to the convention. So I've been working with this kind of toxic chemicals for nearly 20 years. So some of the experience I'm going to bring here and some of the challenges are from my point of view and also what is present in the report given to RC5 by the SAB. So I'm a member of the Scientific Advisory Board, and just to be clear, this is a board of 25 independent experts, so we don't represent our governments, and we just report on the science. And it's the Chemical Weapons Convention is the only disarmament convention with a scientific advisory mechanism. So this report, some of the issues I'm going to bring here that were already mentioned, I will get into some details. It's public and available so everybody can see. But I think I've divided the issues in some main topics. But before sharing them, I'd just like to restate what was been said, that now we have this milestone that with the end of the stockpiles, but actually it's a new beginning, as mentioned, because we need to continue working on preventing the reemergence of chemicals and chemical weapons. There's a lot of science being done to focus on the sea-dumped chemicals, because this is a big issue. There's a lot of studies showing that there are some mechanisms in the sea that's been able to not only to transform some of the chemical weapons into other toxic byproducts, for example. So we need to be able to do this destruction in the sea and to analyze safely. And of course, the issue with the weaponization of science. So the issues that I brought here are mainly, you can see that most of them show that one of the big challenges here is the knowledge sharing. So this is one of the pillars of science, is to share the knowledge. And there's many challenges that were raised at the report that really have to do with this sharing. So we can improve, especially traditional inspection, enforcement, verification, and capacity building activities. And of course, the misuse of science, as we just was mentioned here, the AI issue. I will talk about this again. So regarding the main issue of chemicals. So I'm a chemist also, and we know that the chemical universe is just expanding. We have over 260 million chemicals registered, so we have a big universe of possibilities, so we need to continue to monitor this. And we have new entries that were added to the scheduled chemicals, 4 of them, and we know little about them. So the first main challenge was to share information on them and all the other scheduled chemicals, because we still have a lot of information gaps, which challenge especially inspection, verification, and capacity building activities. So information such as, for example, analytical data, specific precursors or degradation products, this would help a lot to identify them. We still have a lot of gaps in this. Property information, for example, toxicity, information on their chemical degradation pathways and products. So all of these are very critical for us to be able to be sure to detect, identify, and also to confirm, for example, the destruction of them. Another issue that's been raised is the human and plant biomarkers. So there's a lot of studies showing that we can find biomarkers in plants, in insects, and in humans that can be associated with exposure. So this is really a challenge and also an opportunity. There's a challenge in the effectiveness of protective equipment and decontamination techniques, especially regarding the newly scheduled chemicals. So we know little about this, if the protective equipment that's being used is also effective for them. And also, of course, appropriate medical countermeasures. We need to improve. This is a big challenge, again, especially regarding the newly scheduled chemicals. There were some issues raised about the central nervous system acting chemicals that I won't get much in details, such as the fentanyls, which are a big concern, but they were not added to the list and were not addressed because there was a recent decision of the conference state parties that addressed this issue. But it continues to be a concern, especially to share information, how to identify these, because it's a a really big family of chemicals also, the fentanyls. Another big challenge involves biotoxins. So this is a really big problem because we have only 2 biotoxins which are scheduled, but we had a recent temporary group, LPCW, that identified over 7 potential very toxic biotoxins. And the great challenge with these biotoxins is because it's very difficult to identify them due to their diversity. So we can have we have what they call the low molecular weight, the high molecular weight, and usually the labs don't have the expertise to evaluate the whole class of biotoxins. So again, you have to engage laboratories, networks, and to help share information how to build up on this, because they're really emerging and they're a really big challenge for as a chemical weapon. And just to talk about, since I'm talking about biotoxins, there's a really big challenge involving biotechnology. So when we look, for example, at the new technologies related to synthetic biology, metabolic engineering like CRISPR, we just had a recent Nobel Prize last year in chemistry with this. It's showing how we can now really fastly synthesize new chemicals and synthesize biochemicals, for example, biotoxins. So we need to be alert on these technologies. And of course, we need to be able to detect them and to identify them. So these are really big challenges. Of course, another big challenge is the IA. It was mentioned here again. And of course, it has a lot of opportunities. So we can have opportunities in identifying new pathways, the automation of synthesis or formulation, for example, using robotics. You can predict the hazardness or the toxicity of compounds. You can discover new compounds, identify new routes. So it can have a lot of opportunities, of course. But you can also use it to find new approaches, for example, to discover, design new medical countermeasures. There are some studies on this. But as mentioned, there's a lot of risks, especially to discover new chemical weapons, as was mentioned by the study that was just conducted. So we need to be alert on this, and we need to have ethics conduct regarding this use. And it's not, the use is concerning not only in the field of chemical weapons convention, but overall in science, because this can be considered misuse of science. Finally, it was mentioned also the technology for delivery and dissemination. So the unmanned platforms like drones is a big concern and challenge, although it has also a lot of opportunities. Drug delivery, for example, we have the encapsulation of chemicals, for example, for many drugs. This could be a risk, but this can also be an opportunity, for example, for treatment, because we still have a lot of concerns and a lot of, we don't have very good treatments for when we have exposures in many cases. And just this last topic regarding chemical safety and security, this has been always raised as a very big challenge and opportunity also. I think I'll come back to this when we have the next question, but chemical safety can benefit chemical security. So when we have tools and frameworks that enable chemical security institutions in the industry, this will surely help the chemical security also. So this has been a really strong aspect that has to be always ensured and considered, and it's a challenge, but it's also a really good opportunity. So I think these are some aspects, and maybe some others I can go to the next question. Thank you.
Thank you, Elisa. I think from all that you discussed, and obviously this is a small part of it, I think that perhaps the takeaway is that what we need to look also is at the technological convergence, not each development by itself, but what's the scenario when you look at the convergence of developments. And also thank you for pointing out both the risk and opportunities, because we usually have a very grim perspective when we discuss technological developments, but there are a lot of opportunities. Perhaps now we can move on to the second part of the discussion and focus a little bit more on the opportunities and what can be done moving forward. So Martin, there have been a number of topics that were identified. We have been discussing them as topics that state parties could build upon and work on, and perhaps you can discuss a little bit of those.
Thank you very much. And actually, CWC is, I would say, the most successful regime in the current framework of disarmament treaties. And as was said here, RevCon and all those other milestones gave a good foundation for our further actions. We mentioned the adaptation of a verification regime, which is necessary due to the technological advancement, but also new trends in the chemical industry. There is a growth in scale and complexity of the chemical industry. There are expanding number of sites which deal with the Schedule II chemicals, as well as changing distribution of geographical distribution of production sites. So countries agreed to change this, to adapt the verification regime. The adjustment will get rid of a backlog of Schedule II inspections, which emerged due to the COVID-19. In 1 or 2 years, we'll get rid of this backlog. And also we have to think how to apply those new technologies into the inspection mechanism, but also it causes questions how to assess how to do inspection on the risk-based assessment, because then, for instance, as a new technological advancement, what if there are highly toxic chemicals produced in the numbers which do not exceed the threshold in the schedule? So there are new questions we have to answer. CCT was, Center for Chemical Technology was mentioned several times, but this is really something which will very much enhance capabilities of not only of PCW, but member states. There are many activities aimed at training of the member states or inspectors. There are capacity building events for member states. Out of, I think, 80 something, I remember 85, 86 capacity building events which took place since last December. 13 were conducted in the CCT, and the number is growing. So this is really something which will very much facilitate our work to the benefit of the convention. Decisions were mentioned, so on tenure policy, as Marcus and Alex mentioned, although the tenure policy is the most rigid in the PCW comparing to other organizations. So after 7 years of employment, there was actually no possibility to do it further, and taking into account the necessity for staff to have very unique skills in the field of chemistry, biology as well. So this is something that should give Director General more flexibility. According to new decision, Director General can extend for 1 year contract up to maximum 3 years, but only 10 people per year. So just whether it's enough, you can respond yourself to this. This is also, I think that nowadays, this is for the first time in the history where there is the lowest number of fixed-term staff in the OPCW. Out of 460-something positions, only 460 positions, only 360 are filled in. So now, this is a really low number. But we hope that with the flexibility, Director General will have more better outcome later. Of course, there was a regional diversity. This is very important, and the action plan. This is the kind of guidance for the Secretariat to continue providing that there are people from all corners of the world, and actually. Nowadays, there is the biggest number ever people working for the PCW from GRULAC countries and Africa. So yeah, I will stop here and looking forward to further questions. Thank you.
Perfect. Thank you so much. Perhaps, Elisa, I can go back to you and we can discuss what are the opportunities moving forward when we think about science and technology developments.
Okay, so I've also divided this in some topics, and I think there are many opportunities, especially regarding the advances in science technology. It was mentioned here already, the Chemtech Center. This is a really impressive center. The infrastructure is like unbelievable. If you look at the analytic techniques and all the spaces that were designed, it's really, really impressive. So talking about this, you can say that one of the great opportunities is the new generation of analytical techniques. So we have new equipments that are very efficient, and many of them we have at the Chemtech Center, and we have it worldwide. Some of them related, for example, for the analysis of the chemicals to the convention, are mostly related to high-resolution mass spectroscopy, or NMR. But we have a lot of improving techniques, especially miniaturized sensors. So this is of great importance, and there's a lot of science being done in this. For example, paper-based sensors. It's something that you can do like a rapid on-site detection. So this is still a really great concern and challenge to do a rapid detection. We have now colorimetric detection, or sensors, that is, you can easily see by the change of colors. So this is doesn't require very a technical background. You can just see a change of color, and you can see if something is present or not. And we have a very promising field, as I mentioned before, that's it's a challenge, but it's also a really big opportunity, is the biomarkers as sensors. So now we can find biomarkers in plants. There was a really nice call and challenge in the OPCW seeking projects worldwide in biomarkers, and this was done with plants, with insects. So it's really nice that you can detect the exposure by these biomarkers. We have in the field of forensic analysis that's also being of great relevance, and they have been showing a lot of opportunities also in looking to, for example, new methods to determine exposure, for example, to chlorine gas. So this is not scheduled, but it's widely used as a chemical weapon. And we know that the convention says that any chemical that's weaponized is also subject to the convention. So there's a lot of study trying to, for example, to determine the exposure of chlorine gas and to differentiate it. For example, I don't know if you know, but for example, we can have other species of chlorine in our body produced by our blood, by our body, and also, for example, if we have a contamination with bleach, or if we swim, we have the chlorine from the pool. So there are many nice studies to differentiate the type of chlorine that's in our body, and to, for example, to confirm exposure to chlorine gas. There's a lot of opportunities in chemical profiling. So this is when you look at a chemical and you say where it is from by analyzing its contaminants, for example. So you can say that this chemical, this water came from this place of the world, and you can maybe connect this to some other kind of incident. So you can do this very well with chemicals. There's a lot of nice forensic analysis being done with this. So you can know, you have information on the production, how it was produced, which precursors were used, which sites were used. You can know the provenance of it, where it was done, and then you can probably link incidents. So this is a really great opportunity. And regarding destruction, well, I just mentioned before the concerns with the chemical weapons that we still have, for example, dumped at sea, or if we have any new chemical weapons that are we need to be destroyed. So we need to have safe methods for this, and there's a lot of studies doing this. And as asked, I'm just going to mention a little bit about green chemistry. That's also a very good opportunity. So green chemistry is like a sustainable way to do chemistry. So chemistry per se is always thought about something very toxic and very hard to do and usually hazardous. But we can do chemistry very well, and in green chemistry is like a new way to, you try to substitute some toxic chemicals. It has actually 12 principles, but I'm not going to obviously, I'm not going to detail them, but it's mainly, one, you have to diminish the waste you produce, you have to substitute hazardous chemicals, you have to use less energy, for example, not use heat or hazardous conditions. And green chemistry has actually been applied a lot to research that are of interest to the chemical convention. So, for example, in the synthesis, because it continues to be of interest to synthesize these chemicals, because, for example, we need to have standards. So to be able to analyze safely something, to identify, we need to have standards. Of course, only some labs are specialized this and can do this, and more and more, we want to do this safely. So we want to produce very low amounts. If these standards, these chemical weapon standards are toxic, you can imagine that the whole route to synthesize them is also very toxic. So there's a lot of studies trying to find new ways to produce them that have less toxic starting products, that don't have solvents, and that are more efficient, that can have higher yields. Many of these syntheses, just to give an example, as a chemist, they have like a 40% yield. That means 40% of what you started is what you have in the end. So it's a very low yield, even for a synthetic organic chemist. So you can use green chemistry for this. Another field that you can use green chemistry is for the destruction. So I can use here also detoxification, neutralization, that's the same thing. And one of the main things that's done here is to use catalysis. So this is a very promising field of chemistry that I work actually with, and it's where you use something called catalyst, and you add this to the medium, and it will accelerate the process of destruction, because many of these destruction reactions, they are very toxic. So you want the destruction to be very fast, and usually they are very slow. So when you add a catalyst, it would be something that would do the reaction that would may take hundreds of years or months to a few seconds, first of all. And the second, you can regenerate, so you can reuse it. So it's recyclable. So it's something that you can put it inside, wait a few seconds, and at the end, nothing toxic is there. And you can just separate it and then use it several times. So this has a great potential also for the destruction. And there's a lot of scaffolds that have been using for this. You can think of small molecules, enzymes, artificial enzymes, nanocatalysts, which are some based on carbon nanomaterials, for example, polymers, biopolymers. So you have like a whole spectrum of material that have been used for this and have really great opportunities. And also you can use green chemistry for detection, to sense. So how can you use green chemistry? You can have an optimal detection method. You can seek a fast, efficient, low detection limits, selective response, and also in the preparation of the detection. Many of the detection systems nowadays, they require several preparation steps. You have to use a lot of reactants and solvents. This is not very sustainable and not green. So you can improve this, and sometimes there are some materials and some studies showing that you can have dual functions. So the same material can destroy and also detect. We have like this integrated system, so you can destroy, detect, and you can wear. So you have this wearable sensors, for example, that are also able to avoid, for example, contamination. There are some nice studies done with this, for example, even with agrochemicals, that's closely related to many chemicals in the convention. So just to sum up, I think we have a lot of opportunities. Science and technology can really bring a lot of opportunities to the convention and to identify threats and to solve problems. And it has been doing this for a lot of years, and there's a lot of people doing really great science on this field. And I can say here a few years maybe talking about this, so I just selected some of the works. Thank you.
Thank you, Elisa. I think that it's great that you are able to translate all of this for us, policy people and diplomats, because science is at the heart of the convention. So we should be aware of all the challenges, but also opportunities, for example, for the verification regime that you mentioned. Perhaps I can move on to the last questions that we have, and if I can ask my panelists to be short, because we do want to have some time for questions. But I'm interested to hear views about what different actors can contribute to the regime and how we can involve them. So Alex, you're part of the CWC coalition, among other things. What's the role of civil society? What can they do? What have they been doing? And also other civil society organizations.
Oh, thank you, Maria, again. Well, I think the end of routine destruction of declared chemical stockpiles implies a sort of shifting emphasis onto a broader range of implementation requirements and activities. And I think when you think about it, destruction is actually quite a quantitative, accountancy-driven activity with a clearly defined endpoint. Depends how long it takes to get to that endpoint, but when you've destroyed everything, you kind of hope and know that you have destroyed everything. Preventing reemergence of chemical weapons is, however, qualitative, it's unclear, it's vastly more difficult. And this work will essentially go on forever. There's no end point. It's never assured, and it requires constant vigilance, both inside and outside the OPCW, to kind of facilitate that work. So crucially then, from my perspective, the prevention of re-emergence really requires, to a much greater extent than destruction, a network of stakeholders across global society. So this is what's often referred to as the web of prevention, required from local, national, and international levels. Basically a network of efforts, coordinated, engaging, talking, listening, and acting. And success, again, from my perspective, depends more than ever on the OPCW's ability to become, of course, both the international hub of knowledge and skills, and that sort of speaks to the question of tenure and knowledge management, but also the ability for the OPCW to productively embed into wider networks, to sort of utilize diverse skills and expertise outside of its walls. So I think that's why the fifth review conference as well, just to sort of go back to that, generated this window of opportunity to more deeply consider engagement, to more deeply consider who and why the OPCW is engaging. So on civil society, last week I presented a paper on this issue, and there was a lot for actors to consider, different interests, different intentions. And engaging civil society, well, I mean, it's diverse, as a diverse group of actors from different regions, different areas of work, and indeed participating in different ways. So we see a lot of focus, I think, in the OPCW on attendance and participation at CSPs, so the annual conferences. But there's much less focus on different forms of engagement in the intercessional periods. And I think as actors in the regime, sort of all of us, whether we're states or non-states, we need to consider how civil society engagement can be made more substantive and less symbolic. And I think this will be crucial to focus on because civil society feed into a number of key areas which underpin implementation, so advances in science and technology, which you've obviously been talking deeply about, but also national implementation, capacity building, assistance and protection, open source intelligence, outreach, engagement, and also, of course, industry. So industry actors are really these functional actors in my view of this. They've engaged historically, but if we think about how we move forward on preventing chemical weapons, so both through the list-based approach of the verification regime, but also implementation of the general purpose criterion, we actually need industrial inputs. We need the scientific community, people who work in industry to feed in. And also without their support, I think states do have a hard time implementing a lot of the verification requirements. And I'll conclude by saying I think the EU has a significant role to play, and I'll take the opportunity to say that while I'm on the table. But their voluntary contributions to the OPCW in many different areas over the last 20 years actually have had a lot of implicit engagement rationales. So when you look at some of those decisions and the funding contributions, even when it doesn't necessarily say engagement, you read what the money is sort of being used for, there is that implicit desire to see civil society or different segments of it being engaged. And so moving forward, putting money in the Trust Fund for Civil Society, which is a trust fund run by the Secretariat, and that really gives the Technical Secretariat a mandate to create more of these engagement opportunities. And I think that's really quite vital. And as Megan D, I think, outlined yesterday, this sort of funding by the EU, these sort of efforts to coordinate and convene, is quite a key way for the EU to pursue its interests. And I think by bringing civil society into this more squarely, it can really make a difference there. So I think, yeah, finally, my final kind of sentence, I know when you say final, it's like final, but final. I think we need to consider generally who we are, what we are, why we're doing this, the sort of who, what, when, where, why of civil society in the context of CWC implementation. It's not actually as clear-cut or as easy as it seems. But I would say that implementation of the prevention of re-emergence is not possible. I'd say it's almost impossible without the engagement, input, cooperation, coordination with civil society. So states really cannot do it alone. Thank you.
Thank you, Alex. Yesterday we have been talking in several panels about EU efforts and what the EU can do, but we didn't talk as much about what civil society and other stakeholders could do, so that's really interesting. And may I add to what you said about the need for substantive engagement of civil society, and I would say also youth. that's something that I know there's a panel on next generations here in this conference, which I think is great, and we should foster that. So now let's talk a little bit more about what the EU can do, what's the role of the EU in strengthening the regime. We know they have been critical to funding civil society participation, but over to you, Marcus, for that intervention.
Thank you so much, and thank you, Alexander. Your words were honey to my ear, and of course, I'm sure honey to the ears of many member states representatives in the room. So the question you had given to me, Maria, was the role of the EU and its contribution to consolidate the regime. And my starting point is that the chemical weapons regime is consolidated. The issue is rather how to further strengthen it and enhance the global non-use norm of chemical weapons, the so-called taboo, which has been challenged quite seriously since 2013. But first of all, perhaps it's good to recall what EU means in the OPCW context. First of all, the European Union is not a party to the Chemical Weapons Conventions. It is limited to states parties. But the EU actively contributes to the meetings of the OPCW policymaking organs, speaking through the rotating EU presidency. So there's an established way of getting EU views forward. But the EU is also the 27 member states. And an illustrative fact of this is that combined, the 27 member states pay almost a quarter, 25% of the OPCW regular budget. And another example is that the European Union and its member states together actually financed 50% of the establishment cost of the new Chemtech Center. But of course, money is not everything, but it sure helps. But there is more to it. So basically, what is behind the EU's strong position and strong support is an EU strategy on weapons of mass destruction from 2003. And yesterday, when I was listening to the other panels, I heard calls for the need of revising this strategy. Well, this might be the case. I'm not saying that it should not be revised, but I have to say that in terms of chemical weapons and the Chemical Weapons Convention, it sure has stood the test of time and has served well in inspiring and channeling support for the OPCW, both politically, diplomatically, and financially. Since 2004, so right after the strategy was agreed, there have been more than a dozen so-called EU joint actions or EU Council decisions granting voluntary financial contributions in support of OPCW activities. And it amounts to more than 43 million euros by now. We should see everything in relation. So the OPCW works with a very limited yearly budget, something like 70 million euros for it. So it's, you know, compared to what you do, I'm looking at Marcin, so it's really reduced, and this means that the extra budgetary funding is quite important. But perhaps then in concrete terms, what the EU has been able to do with these contributions. Three kind of sets. For example, we have been helping to finance the design and update of the OPCW cybersecurity and information protection systems. They are now up to date, and we can rest assured that the continuous hacking attempts will remain unsuccessful. Secondly, support to the OPCW core activities across the board, notably in capacity building through the Africa program, laboratory twinning, universalization efforts, support to the SAB, and Elisa, you mentioned the biomarker issue. Well, I'm happy to announce that that was thanks to EU financing. Alexis, you mentioned the NGOs, and we have been constantly supporting outreach to external stakeholders, including civil society, NGOs, and youth, etc. Thirdly, more operational support also has been is being given, and for example, here I refer to the attribution activities stage party is tasked the OPCW to undertake, and in this context we help the operations through provision of satellite imagery that really make operations work. That was the direct support. There's also indirect support or contributions. And here, for example, I would like to recall the EU's biggest ever civilian security program, the so-called CBRN, Centers of Excellence Initiative, running since years, involving hundreds of millions euros, improving CBRN capabilities in many countries and at a regional level, and the synergies with the OPCW in this area. Finally, I would like to mention that a cooperation agreement between the EU and OPCW will be signed in the very near future. So that's a new important development. This new formal framework will help to discuss together the challenges and identify synergies and areas of cooperation and support. And to summarize my reply, my intervention is that the EU and its member states are there to support. We will continue to support the OPCW in a comprehensive and substantial manner, and including by pushing back disinformation. Thank you.
Thank you very much. We covered a lot of ground, but obviously there are a lot of things that we can still discuss, including some recent developments in the last week or so. I'm sure our audience has questions and comments, so I'm going to open the floor to any of you. Please raise your hand. I'm going to take a few questions. So let's start with the gentleman here in the front, and then we'll go. It's coming. The microphone is coming.
Good morning. I'm Ambassador Sotania. I was the first Secretary National Authority to Chemical Weapon Convention, and I've been since then working following the OPCW. I commend the panelists. Hopefully the suggestion is for the next time give more time for us for interaction and use these experts for this interaction. The OPCW have been successful, I have to confess. But there is a serious challenge for the future of the OPCW and CWC. Politicization and polarization is coming now. I refer to you 24th of March UN Security Council area event. I was invited as a speaker to follow all technical legal aspects of what's happening in OPCW. I recommend you to follow it, and I have a paper who is interested to give you very expert review of the status quo. Unfortunately, under IIT, which was decided in not by consensus in OPCW, a new precedent, very dangerous precedent has happened in OPCW. Given authority to inspectors, which are only, according to CWC, responsible for verification of declaration of member states, to judge. This is very, very dangerous, and that is why we face a lot of problems. Don't be, I think, don't be surprised that future REFCOMs or so will have the same problem, because it has been politicized. Unfortunately, for 20 years, excellent OPCD was working. We didn't have any problem, but this is, you have to find a root cause. I want to say that I was honored when Syria joined the Chemical Weapon Convention. I was honored to be appointed as a special advisor to OPCW to help them because of my past experience. And when we were in the hotel filling the initial declarations, many parts of the country was under the terrorists. Therefore, they were not able to fulfill the information, but they, Western countries also, just raised this issue. Why Syria has not given the full information? It was not possible. Rather than appreciating CWC, Syria joining CWC, helping universality and Middle East being free zone, hopefully, which was a very positive decision, and Iran and, in fact, Russia encouraged Syria to join chemical weapon. And I myself, having experience of 100,000 chemical victims, injured and dead, we were pushing Syria to full implementation. But now they have brought the issue of Syria as if that you have there to prove it, whether you have used it or not. There's a lot to say. Please talk to me, whoever is interested, to show you that this is a very dangerous trend for the future of PCW. The sooner the better we have to stop this politicization. Of course, I have the article explaining what are the problems and how to be done in the future. I hope that, of course, I congratulate Consortium, but we need more interactions. This is not OPCW conference to say what are we doing. We just want to use the top experts there to have interactions, and out of here we see where are the problems and challenges from the future. But anyway, I'm grateful to you, and I congratulate whoever is working at OPCW for the same cause, which is our own common cause for deleting any chemical weapons. Thank you.
Thank you very much for your comment. Of course, what you raised, Syria, the IIT, are issues that are on the agenda as kind of the elephant in the room. So I'm sure we'll have comments on that. There was another question here in the front, and then we'll go to the back.
Good morning, everyone. It's on? Okay, fine. My name is Jacek Savic. I'm a head of the Non-proliferation Division in a Polish MFA, and I want to just, on the very beginning, to thank all of you respectively for an extremely insightful and interesting presentation to the point. Every one of them was extremely insightful, I must admit. And I want to say that, of course, the review conference was the most important, the most significant event of the year with regard to this chemical sphere. But the time is running, and we just every single day we have been overwhelmed by the another events. And one event, of course, very, very, I would say, significant for us. That, for example, not later than yesterday, the General Assembly and adopted the resolution, which is Poland is a sole sponsor on the implementation of the Chemical Weapon Convention, with a very, very overwhelming majority of the almost 100 votes of the United Nations members, which is extremely important for us as a sole sponsor and also for the international community, and it's for the CWC itself and the OPCW. This is the sign that the international community supports the work of the OPCW and the work and the convention itself. And the role of the EU is, of course, very important in supporting our resolution. And I must admit, Ali, to much extent, that even in New York, during our consultation on this resolution this year, the consultation have been in a kind of the constructive atmosphere, and even we've taken on board one of the proposals presented by Iran. And it has been taken on board, and it's in the resolution, what of course did not prevent Iran to vote against this resolution anyhow. Also I got another remark, very brief one, just and I believe it's you know all of you already know this significant thing which has happened no later than a week ago in The Hague during the meeting of the Conference of the State Bodies. And the next term of the Executive Council of the OPCW, Russian Federation will spend somewhere else. It means it has not been elected to the Executive Council for the first time ever in the history of the international organizations in the executive bodies, neither in the IAEA, not in the Chemical Weapons Convention, anywhere, from the Soviet Union times. This is important because it says that the international community does not give any consent for the violating of the rules-based order, and the brutal aggression against the member of the international organization, which is Ukraine. This is extremely significant, and of course that's why I got a question to Marcin and Marcus, of course, kind of extrapolating, anticipating what would be the kind of knowing the Moscow, what would be the retaliation from them, whether they, for example, decide to suspend the I don't know, annual contribution and maybe more severe significant steps. Thank you very much, and thank you very much once again for the presentations.
Thank you. There was a question in the back to the right. And if I could ask you please to be very brief, because we do need to wrap up. So I'm going to give you then the floor to our panelists to conclude. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much. Good morning to everyone. My name is Igor Kutsar, and I am a representative of the EU delegation in Geneva. I'll try to be really brief, starting with my expression that I simply do not believe that polarization and politicization of the OPCW is a result of the OPCW work, which we do see as a very professional and impartial. But I would like to ask a concrete question. How would you characterize perhaps the interaction, link, or relation, if you wish, between the OPCW and Australia group? Do you see it as a risk, challenge, or opportunity, or advantage for the OPCW and the regime that CWC creates? We all know that in Australia group there is a discussion on science and technology, chemical industry, which could happen in a completely different environment and a different pace. Is it something that can contribute to the consolidation of the CWC regime, or do you think that it can further undermine this regime? Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Now I'm going to give the floor to our panelists. Please pick and choose whatever you want to respond to. And also one question for me. If there was one key takeaway that you want the audience to take with them, what would that be? So perhaps, Alex, I could start with you.
Thank you very much. Yeah, so I mean, I do agree that there is politicization, but in my mind, politicization emerges because a small group of states parties will not take decisions to uphold the norm and hold those who use chemical weapons accountable. They continue to shield those states, they distort information and do all they can to politicize the technical, lawful and expert work of the Secretariat. So in my mind, that's where the kind of politicization emerges. Key takeaways. I think we should be thinking more about AI and how AI kind of integrates into the whole gamut of kind of things we need to consider under the regime, and how we verify and how we understand science and technology generally. What was your other question? Sorry, I was too busy thinking about how to respond to the politicization one, because I think that is an important issue, but one that is often framed the wrong way around.
Thank you. That was really helpful. Elisa, your main key takeaways or response?
Yes, so as a scientist, I think that my main key takeaway message is that we need to continue investing and improving the science, because it's paramount for the regime, it's paramount for us to have better knowledge on how to improve verification, how to improve inspection, and it could be very paramount for solving problems. So I know this may seem obvious, but this means that we need to ensure that we're doing great science all over the world. So we need the countries to be able, now again, talking as a scientist, we need to have investment. And we know that time and again, depending on the government, there are some budget cuts on this aspect, and this is a very important issue. We need to have good science. We have to have money. It was said here that the Chemtech Center had a lot of money. It's a really impressive center, and it has to have money to do this impressive work. And the final message is that, I mean, again, I'm from a university, I'm a teacher. So it's obvious, and the education underlies everything. So for us to be able to do the good science, to have good scientists doing good science, we need to invest in education, have to have the youth also learning about chemical ethics, learning about the convention. There's a lot of interest in the outreach programs. We know that knowledge is priceless, so the best way for us to combat fake news, that we just had a lot of recent events, for example, the COVID, is to give knowledge to the people so they can really be able to have their own tools to rely on. So thank you again.
Thank you for highlighting that. Marcin, your last words, response to the questions?
Thank you very much on politicization, because we can very often hear this, but I think that technical secretariat is technical, but organization itself is also political. Ambassadors, representatives of the member states who are sitting in the policy-making organs are by nature political. So what they bring to the table are instructions from their capital. So this is not a politicization, but this is reality we face in other regions and on the ground. On decision making, also a lot has been already said many times. All decisions, although by voting, are taken according to the convention. Syria. On Syria, we could have separate, of course, here discussion and panel. So I will not dwell on this, just to say that there was, on the occasion of the 10 years of Syria's accession to the CWC, the Technical Secretariat prepared a note which summarized 10 years of engagement there. There has been all declared chemical weapons in Syria has been destroyed, 1,300 metric tons, but Syria then have 17 amendments to this declaration, and there are still 20 outstanding issues as regards discrepancies. So let's not talk so much about Syria. On Russia retaliation, I wouldn't, first, I hope there will be no retaliation. And second, it's very difficult for me to comment as a member of the Technical Secretariat, but of course this is a decision of the states, conference of the state parties, fully legitimate decision, and who will represent EEG in the Executive Council. On OPCW and Australia group, of course, cooperation with all international frameworks is very much needed nowadays, with also export control regimes, but also in terms of exchange of experience and views on the new technologies. It was very important for us. So I will stop here. Thank you.
Marcus, your last words, intervention? Thank you.
How many minutes? One. Okay.
We started a little bit late, so
then
maybe two.
Okay, fine. Okay, Mr. Ali, I agree with you that the work has been politicized, but I also agree with Alexander that it is not because of the OPCW and Technical Secretariat how they are doing their work. They are conducting their work that has been tasked by the member states, and by the way, in the verification annex, it is clearly said that if an inspector finds out the origins of the chemical weapons, this information should be passed on. And I think that, honestly, I mean, all the states parties should then overall play by the rules that have been established. Australia group, my view is that it is complementary to the Chemical Weapons Convention and supports its implementation. As regards the possible retaliation by Moscow, well, rest assured there will be. We don't know just what form, but I also saw the instant reply from the Russian Foreign Ministry after the ousting of Russia became known, saying that Russia will continue to play an active role. And they can perfectly do so being an observer. But so let's keep an eye on what this retaliation, what it materializes. And finally, the the takeaway for me would be that we need, and state parties need to keep the OPCW fit for purpose. There are so many challenges out there. There's so much that a great number of state parties still need to do to be to fully implement what they have signed up to in the Chemical Weapons Convention, and that their best help is OPCW Technical Secretariat, which is fit for purpose. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And although we started about 5 minutes late, we finished on time. I am impressed. Thank you so much. I'm sorry that we didn't have too much time for interaction, but I'm sure we can take this to coffee now. I think we're going to a coffee break. So thank you so much for being here in this room today, and please help me congratulate my panelists today.